My name is Richard Branson. I work in a small factory as a laborer. I have no special qualifications and started working right after finishing high school. I can't afford to quit my job, even though the pay is very low. Because of this, I have just a single $300 bill in my wallet, and there's only about $800 in my bank account. I figured I could manage somehow. One day, I saw a girl who looked very rough. She was wearing a high school uniform, but it wasn't from any local school. It was cold, and she wasn't wearing a coat. Her knees were scraped and her clothes were a mess. I wondered what was wrong with her. Wasn't she going home? She was sitting there at that time. Maybe she had a stomachache or something. She kept rubbing her legs together and blowing on her hands to warm them up. I thought if I left her alone, she might get into trouble. So I decided to help. I went to a nearby coffee shop and bought some hot drinks and donuts. When I walked over to her, she looked scared and tensed up. "Hey, good evening. Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you," I said. "You looked cold, so I got you something warm. Would you like this?" I handed her a hot lemon tea. She took it and pressed it against her cheek to warm up. "Aren't you hungry?" Being hungry makes you feel even colder. "Here, would you like to eat this?" I didn't know what kind of donuts teenage girls liked, so I just picked one. She took it and said, "Thank you," in a small voice. "Aren't you going home?" I asked. She shook her head, but didn't say anything. I wondered if she had run away from home, but I didn't want to get too involved. I wasn't sure what to do next, but then the wind blew her skirt, and I saw that her legs were covered in painful-looking wounds. "What happened to your legs?" I asked. She quickly pulled her skirt down to cover them, but I had already seen the injuries. "Did someone hurt you? Were you beaten?" She stiffened and didn't seem like she wanted to talk. "Okay, I'm sorry. There are things you don't want to talk about, right? That's fine. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But if you stay here, you might get into trouble. How about going home?" She said in a small voice. "No, I was thinking of going to my dad's place, but it's far away." Her dad's place? That meant she was living with her mom now. I didn't know what was going on, but it seemed complicated. "Why don't you call your dad? Maybe he can come pick you up." I don't know his phone number. I don't even have a cell phone. I was surprised that a teenager these days didn't have a phone. "Do you know his address? Do you know where he lives?" She nodded and showed me a small piece of paper with an address I didn't recognize. "Is this where you can meet him?" She nodded again. "It does seem far, and it's already late." I took out my smartphone and searched for the address. It came up as Greenwood Group UK, a construction company. I wrote down the phone number I found and gave it to her. "Here's a number I found for that address. You should call it tomorrow. You'll probably find out about your dad. It's Greenwood Group UK, so maybe your dad works for a construction company. I hope you can see him." The girl smiled brightly. "All right, you should stay at a nearby hotel tonight. I'll make a reservation for you. You can stay alone, right?" I don't have any money. I didn't have much money either, but I had a $300 bill in my wallet. Maybe it would be enough for one night. "Don't worry, I can cover one night for you. After a warm bath and a good night's sleep in a bed, you should call your dad. But I can't pay you back. Don't worry about it. Just focus on meeting your dad." I booked a room at a nearby hotel that included breakfast for $300. I took the girl there, spoke to the staff, and handed over the money. I also asked them to let her make a phone call in the morning. After that, I left. I felt good about helping her, even though my wallet was empty. A few days later, my factory manager, Mr. John, called me in. "Did you call for me?" I asked, surprised, since it was my first time being called to his office. I went in with a nervous look. Mr. John was wearing an expensive suit, which seemed odd for a small factory manager. "It's Richard, right?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Richard Branson," I replied. "You don't need to come here anymore," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "It means you're fired," he said bluntly. I was shocked and didn't know what to say. "So, pack your things and leave," he added. "Excuse me, can you tell me why? Did I do something wrong?" I asked, still not understanding. "We don't need troublemakers like you in our company," he said. "I don't understand. What makes me a troublemaker?" I asked. "You have connections with the mafia, don't you?" he accused. "No, that's not true," I protested. "I can't believe this. I've never been involved with the mafia. Say what you want, but the mafia is looking into you. We can't have someone like that working here. We never wanted to hire someone with just a high school diploma in the first place. The old boss used to say things like, if someone is motivated, that's enough. Please, I have nothing to do with the mafia. If I lose this job, how will I survive? I pleaded. I don't care if you end up on the street. That's not my problem. Maybe you should ask the mafia for help, he said coldly. I really have nothing to do with the mafia. There must be a mistake. Please, don't fire me, I begged. No, the decision is final. We don't need people like you in our small factory. Next time you apply for a job, don't lie about stuff like this, he said, ending the conversation. I'm not lying. I've never been involved with such people. Were you hanging out with bad kids in high school? Are those the kind of people looking for you? Mr. John asked. No, that's not possible. Please, Mr. John, I'm telling you the truth. Enough. Just leave. I've told the office to pay you for today. Don't ever come back to our company again. I kept saying there must be some mistake, but he wouldn't listen at all. He looked at me like I was trash, then pointed at the door and said, Is that all you've got to say? I've heard your side of the story, and that's enough. Now get out. I've got work to do. It was over. Realizing this was the end, I went to the office and received a thin envelope. It was my last paycheck from the company. Was the 13 years I worked so hard for really worth just this thin envelope? When I said goodbye to my colleagues, they were shocked and said things like, Why so suddenly? That's ridiculous, expressing their regret over my departure. But no matter how much my colleagues regretted it, there was no changing the manager's mind, and no one was willing to stand up for me. They knew that if they did, they might be the next to be fired. Leaving my colleagues with a take care, I walked out of the company gates I had been going through for 13 years. What am I supposed to do now, being fired so suddenly? All I have is this thin envelope. I just hope I can find another job before the money runs out. Thinking these thoughts, I was looking at the ground beneath my feet when I noticed a black car stopping nearby. Why would a car stop here? Curious, I looked up and saw a black luxury car. It's in the way, I thought. Must be some big shot here for the factory. He should hurry up and get inside. The driver, wearing gloves, got out and opened the rear door. A man in an expensive suit and a girl stepped out. The man asked the girl, Is this the guy? She nodded. Seeing her nod, I exclaimed, Oh, you're the girl from that time. So, you did meet your dad, right? That's great. I'm really glad you were able to meet him safely, forgetting my own troubles for a moment. I talked to her, and she smiled brightly and hugged me. Thanks to you, my daughter was able to come to me safely. Thank you so much, said her dad. You're her dad. That's great. I was worried about her but didn't know how to contact you. I replied, By the way, are you leaving the company so early? Do you have somewhere to be? Oh yeah, something like that, I said with a forced laugh. I couldn't tell someone I just met, especially someone who looked like a company president, that I had just been fired. He seemed important, riding in such a fancy car, and dressed so well. I felt like I shouldn't even be talking to him. If you're not in a hurry, I'd like to thank you. It's almost lunchtime. How about a meal? He asked. No, thank you. That's too much. I couldn't possibly accept your gratitude for something that was just the right thing to do. I replied. Come on, don't be like that. Of course, if you have other plans, I won't insist. But if you're free, could you join me? I wouldn't feel right letting you go without properly thanking you. After all, you helped my daughter, and a simple thanks just doesn't seem enough, he said. I initially refused because I had nowhere to be. I had just been fired, and in my sad state, looking for another job wasn't going to go well. So I thought, if he insists, I'll accept his offer. If you insist, then I'll join you, I said, and decided to go along. I got into the car and we went to a high-end restaurant. Excuse me, I'm dressed like this, I said, looking at my work clothes. I had expected a diner at most, so I was surprised. But the man laughed and said, Don't worry about it. Clothes don't eat the meal, and pushed me forward. He must have been a regular because the hostess didn't make a fuss and even smiled at me. The atmosphere in the private room was luxurious and extraordinary. I thought to myself, wow, this place is very fancy. It feels a bit uncomfortable for someone like me with just a high school diploma. But as the drinks started flowing, things began to feel different. Seeing the girl's smile and the warm conversation between her and her father was enough to warm my heart. Not to mention, the fine drinks and luxurious food made me feel like this might be the first and last feast of my life. I was enjoying every bite of my meal. After a while, the man revealed his identity. "I should have introduced myself at the beginning, but that's just how I am," he said, handing me a business card. It read, "Beat of Greenwood Family UK." "Oh my God, Mafia!" I exclaimed. "Yes, you're right," he replied calmly, "but a Mafia member is also a parent. Thanks to you, I could reunite with my daughter, and I'm very grateful." "Oh, it was my pleasure," I said. "By the way, I've been wondering, why was she there that day?" "That's because her mother and I divorced years ago," he explained. "She remarried soon after. Her new husband became the vice president of a small factory. But after her mother passed away, his new wife moved in. The president of the factory, who had been kind to my daughter, also passed away. After that, the vice president took over as president, and my daughter was treated poorly." "Is that why her legs were bruised?" I asked. "Yes," he said sadly. "She was hurt in places that wouldn't show, especially on her back. It was terrible. Her mother had given her an amulet before she died and told her to use it if she ever needed help. That amulet had a note with my address. Not having a phone number on it was a bit of an oversight," I commented. "She was trying desperately to find me," he continued. "Even though she's in high school, it was a long distance to walk. By the time you found her, her wallet was empty. If she had stayed out there, she might have frozen to death. It was a tough situation. Her mother's new husband put her through so much pain, and I swore to get revenge for what he did to her." "It doesn't sound good for a Mafia member to say that, but I understand how you feel," I said. "Thank you. What about you? Leaving work at this hour, something must have happened, right?" he asked. It's a bit odd to tell this to someone I just met, especially a boss, but I was actually fired just now, I said. "Fired? Why?" he asked, surprised. "I was wrongfully accused of having connections with antisocial forces. I have no idea how that happened. Just this morning, out of the blue, I was told about it, and then fired." "Wait a minute," he said. He called over an executive who was standing by. After a brief whispered exchange, she exclaimed, "Idiots," and turned to me. "I'm really sorry, that was my guy's fault," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I wanted to thank you so much that I had my men check up on you. They found out where you worked but wanted to make sure you were really there. It seems like they mentioned our organization's name over the phone. That's probably what got back to your boss and led to you being fired. I'm really sorry about that. Let me fix this. I'll talk to your manager tomorrow, explain the misunderstanding, and everything should be okay." "No, it's all right," I replied. "It's not all right. You must be in trouble, right?" he insisted. "Yes, it's true that I'm in a tough spot," I admitted, "but going back to work under a manager who doesn't trust me would be the same old problem. I don't want to work for someone like that." "I see. So, do you have another job lined up?" he asked. "No. Embarrassingly, I have nothing. Honestly, if I don't find something by the end of the month, I'm in big trouble. But I still want to stand firm and find a job on my own," I explained. "Good for you. In that case, how about I introduce you to a company run by a friend of mine? They're not involved with the mafia or anything. I think my friend would like you," he offered. "No, that's okay," I said, even though I really wanted to accept his offer. I was tempted, but could I trust it, knowing he was involved with the mafia? "Well, if you ever need help, call the number on my card. I'm always here for you," he said with a smile. About a month later, I ended up needing his help. No matter how many interviews I went to, I couldn't find a job. I was starting to think I'd have to settle for part-time work. Then one day, he called me. "I'm in the mood for a drink, but I've got no one to drink with. Would you mind keeping me company? Don't worry about the money. I'm inviting you." He made it sound like I wouldn't be a burden, even though he was a mafia boss. I was surprised to see such a kind side of him and decided to accept his invitation. "If it's a bar, you really don't want much, right?" he asked. "That's not true. I'm just picking a bar because I'm more comfortable there than in a fancy restaurant. I've never been to a fancy restaurant. It makes me feel nervous, honestly," I replied. I feel more comfortable in a casual bar. I see. I guess I wasn't being very thoughtful, he said. No, not at all, I replied, holding up my beer mug. I'll take this, thank you, and I gulped down the beer. So, did you find a job? He asked. Actually, not yet. Being just a high school graduate, it's been really hard. I've applied to a lot of companies, but no luck, I explained. That's tough, he said. I was thinking, would you mind helping me with something for a moment? My heart skipped a beat. Being asked by the mafia to help out didn't sound good. I couldn't help but think it was something bad. But he continued talking in a way that made me feel less worried. Even though I'm with the mafia, it doesn't mean we only do bad things. I just want to get justice for the man who hurt my daughter. Justice? I asked. Yes, over the past month, I've been looking into who did those terrible things to my daughter. It turns out it was the manager of the company you worked for. He acts as the manager, but the previous manager used to wear work clothes and help out on the factory floor. This guy wears expensive suits and never shows up at the factory. He lives in a luxury neighborhood over an hour away by car. That's why he's always late. Exactly, he's the typical executive who doesn't care about the workers. My daughter was like his maid, and it seems she wasn't even fed properly. She was crying while eating just a single bagel. Really? That's terrible, I said, shocked. Yes, it's true. I can't believe he treated my daughter like that, he said angrily, finishing his beer. That's why I need your help. I want to get revenge for my daughter, but I'm not planning anything illegal. I don't want to end up in jail and miss out on time with my daughter because of a guy like him. So, we're going to do it legally. Legally? I asked, curious. Yes, that's why I set up a company. What kind of company? I asked. It's in the same industry, but it doesn't really matter. What I really want to do is take over his company. Take over? Yes, we'll take it over and get rid of the manager. I've got all the evidence against him, he said confidently. He's got a lot of personal debt, mostly from gambling and similar stuff. Now he's using the company's money to pay off his debts. Is he really? I asked, surprised. Yes, that's why the employees' wages are so low. They dropped a lot after the previous manager passed away. That's true. Our salaries did drop sharply after he died, I confirmed. That's the scheme. You all were working to cover his debts. I want to kick him out of the company and make it a place where the employees can earn what they deserve, he explained. What will happen to him if he's kicked out? I asked. Well, he'll probably end up in deep trouble. Plus, his wife only married him for his money. If she finds out he's no longer the president, she'll likely leave him, and I'll make sure no company will hire him, he said confidently. You can do that? I asked, amazed. Hey, I'm the boss of Greenwood. I can handle things like that easily, he replied. I asked for your help because you were also a victim of his actions. I thought maybe you'd want revenge too. Yes, I think all the employees would feel the same way once they know about this, I said. They probably would. If this goes well, I plan to expand that factory even more. I want to make you the manager, he said. Me? A manager? But I'm just a high school graduate. That's impossible, I said, feeling doubtful. What are you talking about? In the past, it wasn't uncommon for high school graduates to become presidents. If you lack education, you make up for it with experience and hard work. I believe you can do it, he encouraged me. If you become the manager, I can trust the factory will be in good hands. The first task will be taking over that factory. Are you in? I understand. Count me in, I agreed. Good, then tonight we'll drink to the future of the new company, he said. And that's how I found myself unexpectedly involved in the plan to take over the factory that had fired me. 2 months later, we had thoroughly investigated the factory and the manager from all angles. We decided to cause significant financial damage to the factory through our takeover plan. Long time no see, Mr. John, I said when we met again. Oh, have we met before? He asked, looking puzzled. You wouldn't remember a high school graduate employee. It's Richard Branson, I said, revealing my identity. I was fired under the false accusation of having connections with the mafia. No, that was just Greenwood calling to check if you were an employee. You used that as a reason to fire me, a high school graduate, I said. Well, that's not exactly how it was, he stammered. It's okay. Thanks to that, I found a good job at my current company. I have no hard feelings. In fact, I've come to you with a good offer. I continued. A good offer? You mean you want to make a deal with us? He asked, curious. Yes. Your products are of very high quality, something I know from working here for years. That's why I want to offer you a $8 million contract, I explained. $8 million, he echoed, surprised. Yes, I'd like you to deliver that amount of goods within 3 weeks. Once the delivery is confirmed, we'll transfer the $8 million to you, I said. That would be great. So, will you accept the contract? He asked eagerly. Of course, I said, placing the contract on the table and asking him to sign it. Without reading the details, he was overjoyed by the mention of $8 million and signed it. Knowing his poor administrative skills, I expected this outcome, but it was still amusing to see a company manager behave this way. Once the contract was signed, he pushed his employees hard, making them work without rest. The goods were produced, but when it came time for delivery, a problem arose. No delivery company would accept the job. That was because Greenwood had put a stop to it. Desperate, John himself went looking for any carrier. That's when a truck driven by a member of Greenwood arrived. The goods were loaded onto dozens of trucks, but along the way, they all stopped for various reasons, like vehicle malfunctions. Eventually, the goods didn't arrive by the deadline. I immediately contacted John and went back to the factory. The goods didn't arrive by the deadline. Now our company has suffered a huge loss. This is a breach of contract, I told him. No, we shipped everything properly, he protested. It's clearly stated in the contract, isn't it? If the goods don't arrive, you'll pay $8 million, I pointed out. That's ridiculous, he exclaimed, realizing the mess he was in. I don't know anything about such a clause, Mr. John stammered, looking at me with wide eyes. Whether you know about it or not, it's clearly written here in the contract, I replied, pointing to the specific section. Claiming that you didn't read it won't help you now. This can't be happening. My company doesn't have $8 million, he exclaimed, panic rising in his voice. Well, then we have no choice but to take over this factory, I said calmly. Take over the factory. That's also in the contract, he asked, his voice trembling. Yes, even if the delivery failure was caused by the carrier, your company bears all the responsibility. You signed the contract, didn't you? I reminded him, holding up the document. Wait, I didn't understand what I was signing. Losing this factory will ruin everything, he pleaded, starting to realize the gravity of the situation. It seems so, I said, unmoved by his desperation. And without the factory, no one will cover your personal debts anymore. How did you know about my debts? He asked, shock and fear in his eyes. We did our homework. That's not all. Your wife will probably leave you too. It seems she married you for your money, I continued, laying out the harsh reality. So, you knew all this and still tricked me into signing this contract, he said, his face turning pale as he grasped the full extent of his predicament. It's not just me who has a grudge against you. That's why this happened. Now the factory belongs to our company. Pack your things and leave, I instructed firmly. This is unbelievable. What am I going to do with all this debt? He cried, slumping into his chair, his face buried in his hands. After being kicked out of the factory, John went home to his wife, hoping she could help with the debt. He explained the situation, pleading for her support, but his wife, who had enjoyed a life of luxury thanks to his position, was not willing to stick around now that he was broke. She slammed the divorce papers down in front of him and demanded compensation for all the money she claimed to have spent during their marriage. Without the factory, we're finished. I need your help to pay off this debt, John begged. You should have thought about that before you lost everything, she replied coldly. I married you for your money, and now that you're penniless, there's no reason for me to stay. But we've been together for so long. Can't you help me through this? He pleaded, tears in his eyes. No, I've had enough. You're on your own, she said, showing no sympathy. She handed him the divorce papers, demanding a large sum in compensation. This added to his already massive debt, burying him under an insurmountable financial burden. John, now alone and overwhelmed with debt, found himself in a dire situation. With nowhere to turn, he realized that the life he had built was crumbling around him. The weight of his debts and the loss of his wife left him in a deep pit of despair, facing a future filled with uncertainty and hardship. As the reality of his situation set in, John could only think about how he had gotten to this point. The false accusations, the rushed decisions, and the betrayal by those he trusted had led him to this moment of utter ruin. The once proud manager, who had enjoyed a life of comfort and power, now faced a grim and uncertain future, with nothing left but the crushing weight of his mistakes. When I reported everything to the boss, he was very pleased and praised me. Now, that guy won't be able to get a job anywhere ever again. He'll learn what it really means to betray people. Yes, I hope he realizes the consequences of his actions and understands what it's like to treat people so poorly, I replied, feeling a sense of justice. Right now, you're the manager of that factory, the boss continued. You have the opportunity to grow the company, not just for yourself, but for the employees as well, right? No, I didn't do this for myself, I said, shaking my head. I did it for my daughter, for you, and for the employees who have been working hard at the factory. They deserve to be treated with respect and to have a good working environment. I want to make sure they are happy and feel valued. Good. Make sure those employees are happy and taken care of, he said with a nod. Yes, sir, I understand, I replied. With that, I went back to the factory, now as its new manager. My former colleagues were surprised and happy to see me return. Thank you all for staying and continuing to work hard, I said. I know it hasn't been easy, but together, we can make this factory grow and ensure that everyone gets the salary and recognition they deserve. This factory belongs to all of us, and we will make it a place we can be proud of. As I spoke, I could see the relief and excitement in their faces. They were cheering and welcoming me back warmly, and I felt a deep sense of responsibility and commitment to them. I had been away from the factory for a while, and things had changed. The atmosphere was different, but I was determined to bring positive changes. I started by meeting with each department, talking to the workers, and understanding their concerns. They told me about the problems they had faced under the previous manager, who had treated them poorly and neglected their needs. We were struggling with low wages and unfair treatment, one of the workers told me. It felt like no one cared about us. I'm here now, and I care, I reassured them. We're going to make things better. Your hard work will be recognized, and you'll get the pay you deserve. Let's work together to turn this factory around. I spent the next few weeks working closely with the employees, making sure their voices were heard and their needs were met. We implemented new policies to improve working conditions and raised wages to ensure that everyone was paid fairly for their work. We also focused on improving the quality of our products and expanding our market. One day, I gathered everyone for a meeting. I want to thank all of you for your dedication and hard work, I said. We've made great progress and the factory is already seeing the benefits. Our production has increased and our sales are up. This wouldn't have been possible without each and every one of you. The employees cheered and clapped, feeling appreciated and motivated. They were proud of the work they had done and excited about the future of the factory. As the months went by, the factory continued to grow and prosper. We expanded our operations, hired more workers, and increased our production. The employees were happier and more engaged, and the factory became a place where people wanted to work. During one of our company meetings, I addressed the entire staff. I'm so proud of what we've accomplished together. We've turned this factory around and made it a thriving business. But we're not done yet. There's still so much more we can achieve. Let's continue to work hard, support each other, and make this factory the best it can be. The response was overwhelming. The employees were enthusiastic and committed to the future of the factory. They knew that they were part of something special and that their efforts were making a difference. Over time, the factory became known for its high-quality products and excellent working conditions. We built strong relationships with our customers and suppliers, and our reputation grew. We became a model for other companies, showing that treating employees well and focusing on quality can lead to success. Looking back, I was grateful for the opportunity to make a difference. I had come to the factory under difficult circumstances, but with hard work and determination, we had created something amazing. The factory was no longer just a place of work. It was a community, a family, and a source of pride for everyone involved. And through it all, I never forgot why I had taken on this challenge. It was for my daughter, for the employees, and for the future of the factory. Together, we had turned a struggling business into a thriving success, and I couldn't have been prouder of what we had achieved.